Welcome to episode 37 of the Half Point Per Podcast. I am your host, Evan Riggs, joined once again by producer Johnny Pham and my co-host, Dalton Willie. Dalton, are we sure you're saying your name right? Are we sure it's not like Wiley or something? We haven't been saying it wrong this whole time.
Well, Travis Kelce recently revealed to the world that we had all been pronouncing his name wrong, including his teammates. So I am concerned. I'll get on Ancestry.com after this and do a quick pronunciation check to see where we stand. I'm making sure it's still Riggs and not Riggigigs or anything like that.
So I think that's more of a stretch than Willie the Wiley. I will say, I don't know why this happened, but when I first met you, I think someone told me that your last name was Wiley, because I swear to God, I thought your last name was Wiley for like the first month I knew you.
Everybody calls it Wiley at first. There's a lot of corrections.
Really? Even with two L's? I feel like two L's kind of, although I say that Evan, E-V-A-N, you would not imagine how many times I've been called Even in my lifetime. So,
yeah, Johnny, what's the worst pronunciation of your last name?
P-ham, P-ham,
P-ham,
Fom.
Fom is at least like respectable.
It's close, but like P-ham is just. I was like, are we really doing this?
I just watched the worst. I watched the new Fast and Furious, and they talk a lot about your last name. It's all about fam.
Really?
That is very true.
Didn't know that.
Well, we are live on YouTube. It looks like we were actually up and running during the show this time. About to tweet that out now. So anybody who wants to join us on YouTube or go back and rewatch on YouTube if you're listening to the podcast, we always appreciate that. We have a pretty packed show today that last week we talked about some guys who we had changed our opinions on. This week, it's a little bit of a similar topic. Not guys we've changed our opinions on, though. Guys who could, thank you, Johnny, for the assist here, guys who could burn us in our rankings, who were either afraid that we're too high or too low on. It's funny, Dalton. We only picked two each. We had one of the same before we remedied that. So we're in agreement on at least one guy. I'll be curious to see who your two are since you picked a new one. But we've also got some over-unders again to get to as well. But first, before we get into either of those things, we do have a little bit of an Allen Robinson situation that I thought we could at least touch on or mention. It sounds like there's no long-term deal that's going to happen there, which I don't think is too shocking if you've kind of followed. I don't think a lot of people thought he'd be back this year, and if he was, it was going to be a tag, which is the case. Dalton, does the fact that it doesn't look like a deal is going to get done there and he will likely be looking elsewhere, does that impact first in season long, and then we can talk a little bit of dynasty, does that impact how you view Allen Robinson and his risk portfolio maybe this year? Not
to me, at least dynasty-wise. I mean, he's played with the worst of the absolute worst when it comes to quarterbacks, so it's really nowhere but up from here. And with the cap increasing next year, I really feel like there are some better teams that can make a run at him. Does scare me a little bit with Justin Fields. I don't think Darnell Mooney, who would probably get slotted into that number one role, is a prototypical wide receiver one. He just doesn't really have the skill set to do so. That's concern in and of itself. But I think wherever Allen Robinson ends up, kind of like the Julio thing, you immediately upgrade that quarterback, especially if they're already, a mid-tier pocket passer who's pretty good.
For sure. The one thing I would say, it's not really actionable advice or anything, because it's definitely not anything we could predict. But you do just kind of have to enter the Allen Robinson thing if you're going to have him in redraft with a little bit more eyes wide open kind of mentality. Not that he's going to hold out, but just like there's a non-zero chance that we get to week 12, week 13, and the Bears are terrible, and he knows he's not coming back, and all of a sudden there are some minor injuries.
The Trick Williams way.
It's not again, not like you could ever predict that or should like base your strategy off that, but just something to maybe have in the back of your mind, knowing that you are taking on that slight risk when you draft him, and then when you have him throughout the season, obviously too. That's all I would say about redraft. And then dynasty, you're right. There are probably better options than where he is right now, where he could end up, and there are definitely better options than what he has had for his whole career where he could end up. No doubt about that.
It'll be interesting to see what the Bears do in the draft because they lost their first round pick moving up.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, their offense is going to be pretty bereft of playmakers soon. I mean, David Montgomery's on his last year. I think Tariq Cohen's nearing the end of his contract. You're really working with Darnell Mooney.
Last year of his contract.
And I don't recall the other wide receiver, but I know they were even unhappy with them to end last season. Their third wideout.
Anthony Miller.
Yeah, Anthony Miller. So really outside of Darnell Mooney and Cole Kmet, I think they're really questionable when it comes to the playmaking side of the ball.
Yeah, I actually saw, I can't remember who it was, but I did see somebody, they were talking from a Chiefs perspective, pointing out that there are actually a lot of X receivers in the next draft. So you could definitely see maybe some new receivers there in Chicago. But I thought the Allen Robinson thing was at least worth mentioning. But we can move on to the over-unders. And first, from the Washington football team, arguably I would say one of the maybe 5 or 10 like most hyped guys, not highest ranked, but most hyped guys ahead of this season. And Antonio Gibson, his over-under 1,500 rushing yards, which it's really hard to get 1,000 rushing yards, but also just based on the hype surrounding him, I was a little surprised at this number. Dalton, are you taking the over or under on that Gibson rushing total?
Yeah, I actually thought this was a pretty easy over for me. Just to start things off with, Washington's I think their defense is going to keep them in pretty much every game, and they're going to be competitive, and they're going to want to control the game script. And I mean, I think part of that's going to be utilizing Gibson on the ground. He wasn't profiled as rusher when he came in the NFL, but he did it. That's what he did last year. He was first and down back, first and foremost.
Yeah, and which was a big surprise because, like you said, he almost was exclusively – well, he was a wide receiver and kind of a gadget-y guy, like all of those Memphis guys seem to be. So, yeah, it was a surprise that he was all of a sudden just like a first and second down guy and not as much of a pass catcher last year.
Yeah, and I mean, in 14 games, and as a rookie, he did 795 yards, and that's with the foot injury nagging him in a couple of games. I mean, he was almost on pace last year. You get an extra game. I mean, the only concern I really have going in is what that foot looks like. But I think that if he plays, I always say running backs don't play all 17, but if he plays 16, I think he's pretty much in it.
For me, this was a stay away for me if I'm actually betting. I'm going to go with a very, very slight under. First and foremost, you mentioned it. You've got the foot concern. Not that it's something that is necessarily an issue right now. You just worry about when a guy has kind of an existing thing that he's entering the season with. You worry about that popping up. He was on, I have it right here, like a 900-ish yard pace last season, and probably a little bit more than that if we're being fair. He had 2 carries against the Steelers because he got hurt in that game and played like maybe 5 snaps total. But it's not like he was like a Dobbins or a Swift or even a Jonathan Taylor where he had to really work for his volume. He pretty much got volume right off the bat. Now it got bigger down the stretch for sure, but his first 7 games, he was at least 9 or more carries in all of those games, which isn't great. But again, like Dobbins, he probably had games with like 4 carries. Swift had games with 4 or 5 carries. So he didn't have any of that to kind of drag down his yardage total. I could easily see, number one, even with a very good defense, I could easily see them passing the ball more this year just because they have Fitzpatrick. And while I have my issues with him, overall, I think everybody does. And we obviously have the concerns of just consistency with him. I think they'll pass more than last year because most games he's going to be a lot better at passing the ball than what they had last season. And I think Gibson, I think that's kind of the next step in his game as an NFL player is to see that pass catching role unlocked. I could definitely see like a 1,500 yard type of season from him, but 600 of those passing and 900-ish rushing. So it's an under, but barely. It just feels safer for me to go under.
Yeah, and it really, the main reason I chose the over was it just feels like Ron Rivera is hard set on turning him into a 3-down back after the way he treated him last year. I mean, giving him that first, second down duties was just head scratching from what he's coming in with skill wise. So I just feel like he's going to be on the field enough. And now the only hope is that he's talented enough to really turn those runs into something, and he looks the talent.
Yeah, and I think when we've talked about this before, what is usually the case with a lot of these young guys, and especially with like a Gibson, who he has that skill set. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, you know he has the skill set to catch the ball. Usually it's the other stuff that they need to get down to stay on the field on third downs, whether that's the pass protection or just the different route concepts that the NFL teams have. So like I expect with CEH, I expect more involvement and trust from the coaching staff in that role for him this year for sure. Johnny, over or under that 1,500 yard total for Antonio Gibson?
I like the over. I'm just a big Antonio Gibson guy, so I think the over's a easy bet for me.
All right. Nice. Short and to the point. I like it. Cam Akers, his over-under for rushing yards. And no, I was not trying to trigger anybody by putting Cam Akers in the rundown this week. 1,150.5 rushing yards. I'll take this one first. I'm going under, and this isn't really an anti-Cam Akers take.
Kind of feels like it.
Only 3 guys in the NFL topped this number last year. Like, this is a pretty big number. Derrick Henry, Dalvin Cook, and Jonathan Taylor, which it's funny that Jonathan Taylor did, but he was just had such massive games down the stretch. Like the point that you've made, Dalton, a lot is he should be more involved in the passing game this year. Again, because he, number one, is a second-year guy who should have more familiarity with the scheme. And number 2, they have a quarterback in Stafford who can actually do a little bit more of that. Because usually dumping down to the running back requires, unless it's a designed play, requires the quarterback to look at more than one guy on the play, which is not something that Jared Goff does very often. So I do think that he should have more involvement in the passing game. And I do still say this. I know he got a ton of carries down the stretch last year. I'm not sure if that is sustainable for the whole season, but I do think he'll at least be more efficient and probably come close to pushing this number. He was at, I believe, 38% of his snaps he faced a loaded box, which was 4th highest in the NFL. So it was impressive that he was able to produce what he did against that type of defense, and especially down the stretch last season. He got that volume a lot because either Goff was terrible or Goff was injured and playing with one thumb, or they're playing with a backup quarterback. I just think you're at that number, you're basically hoping for like his best possible season. He's obviously has a little bit of an injury history already. He had, I believe it was an ankle during the season, and then he had the rib injury that cost him a handful of games. So you need a clean bill of health after an injury-plagued season. And I do think Darrell Henderson is going to be a little bit more involved than people think. Not like threatening the workload or threatening the fantasy value, but just I think Henderson's a pretty good player and should see some carries too.
Yeah. So I had this one as a push, and I would probably at first I'd just stay away from it because this is a really high line for a player that we still don't really know what he's going to fully look like. But I did have you stole my stat. He did see the 3rd highest number of stacked boxes in the NFL last season, and that's because Jared Goff stinks. And we're going to see a future where that's definitely a lower number. But you were talking about how he can't carry, that workload that he was kind of on pace for, and it's funny because. This comes from the RB Ranks article I'm writing. From week 12 on, which is really when he saw like a large snap share, larger than 50%, he averaged 23.8 touches a game. That would have averaged out to 381 touches. And I mean, that's like Derrick Henry status. And Cam Akers is not Derrick Henry. He's not built like Derrick Henry.
Yeah.
So definitely, I think this line really is part of the Matt Stafford hype train that I think has gotten out of control. That everybody thinks Los Angeles is going to ultimately unlock. Like they're going to get all 5 Exodia pieces and have Exodia on the field offensively.
Well, and it's like, again, and people see the volume he had last season, like you said, and I just really think that was a product of, number one, they had to do that because Henderson was banged up. Goff being bad and also banged up. And then just when you look at what McVay is saying, like McVay is hyping him up at every turn, right? So he's saying nothing that will make us think he'll get less work. But I also think he'll want his guy to make it through the season.
Well, and we've seen Sean McVay long enough to know his tendencies. And if you told me his tendency was to give a running back 28 carries in a playoff game, I mean, that's just objectively false. He's a pass-first coach. I mean, to end the stretch, Akers had a 21 carry game, a 29 carry game, another 21 carry game, and a 28 in the playoffs. I don't see that those numbers are repeatable. And again, I'm in on him on fantasy for other reasons than just his rushing upside.
Mm-hmm.
And I agree with you that if you're putting a gun to my head, I'm probably taking the under on this. And he probably doesn't play. I put him closer to 14 or 15 games if you ask me to stat it out on how he's going to play.
Yeah, for sure. Johnny?
I would like to point out that because of Cam Akers over under yardage, it can't be a push, Dalton. So that was just false. Wait, so did you end up going with the under or over?
Under.
He said under with a gun to his head, so take that for what
this is one I wouldn't bet.
Slightly aggressive. No, I like the under as well. I feel like that's just such a high inflated number for him.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll take the under on this one.
Mm-hmm. James Conner, talk about a completely different stratosphere as far as projection, caliber of player at this point, you name it. But I thought this was interesting because this is basically a bet on whether or not you think he's going to be a factor in that backfield outside of touchdowns. His over-under for rushing yards is 600.5. Dalton, I'll let you lead us off here.
I don't know why you put this on here. I don't want to talk about James Conner.
Hey, you know what? The reason why I put it on here was because I was looking through lines and I was like, okay, I'll see what Twitter's saying about some of these guys right now. You look up James Conner on Twitter. He is 90% of the tweets about him are, oh, I love James Conner as the RB, whatever, like 35. And the other 10% are like, I hate him. He's done. I'm not drafting him. He's completely toast. So there's a very large consensus and then a very small body of people who are just completely out on the James Conner thing.
Well, there's also this weird Chase Edmonds hype train going on that I still don't understand entirely. But as far as the James Conner rushing goes, I'm doing the under. 600 yards isn't hard to reach, but I don't think he plays even close to 16 games or 17 games this season. I think that there's a more talented back in Benjamin on that team. I think James Conner, if anybody remembers like Jonathan Stewart and the Cookie Monster Mike Tolbert, I really think James Conner was brought in for the Mike Tolbert role of within the 5-yard line, he's going to be running the ball. And that's the bulk of his work is going to be very like 3rd and 1, 3rd and 2. They need someone to put it down the middle. James Conner is very, very efficient at those runs. And I think that's what he's going to be. He's not going to be getting those upsides. And he's probably the 4th best rusher after Kyler Murray on this team.
For sure.
And then Rondell Moore factors into that as well, that I don't know how he's going to play into that backfield.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Johnny?
I like the under. I just don't think he'll be that much of a factor in the game besides maybe red zone touchdowns. I don't think he really does much this year. So I think he'll maybe flirt with it. Maybe 500 yards is what I think he'll get this year, but I'm going to take the under.
So I'm going to make you guys feel really bad about taking the under just for a second. You want to hear 4 names who topped this number last year?
No.
Frank Gore, Todd Gurley, Latavius Murray, and Adrian Peterson all rushed for over 600 rushing yards. So it doesn't take much. With that said, I am taking the under on this as well. just wanted to make everybody a little nervous in here. I'm taking the under. Again, like I said, this is basically a bet on whether or not you think he's going to be a fantasy factor and rather if you think he's going to stay healthy and actually play a decent slate of games, or you're betting on his health, I should say. For what it's worth, I found this thing called Sports Injury Predictor. Gives him an 88% chance of an injury in 2021 and has him missing 3 games. And that feels pretty conservative, honestly. Maybe not the 88%, but the fact of him missing 3 games. I mean, he's never played a full season. And like you, Dalton, I think Benjamin, he was a guy that a lot of people liked out of Arizona State. And I think Brett Coleman, he talked about, I haven't read about this firsthand, but I remember Brett Coleman talking about he thought that Benjamin fell because he had injury concerns out of college. He had an injury that he was dealing with. There was a lot of, I guess maybe it wasn't as easy to get medicals or get like real, you couldn't look at guys yourself in the COVID pre-draft world last year. So there was a lot of extenuating circumstances unique to the COVID draft that made him fall to the 7th round. And I think he probably is a better player than that pedigree would suggest. And I'm with you that I really think he is going to be the third and 1, third and 2, or third and goal on the 3 or 4 yard line type of guy, which is valuable for real football and can be valuable on any given week for fantasy. But I think what we're both saying here is that you shouldn't draft him for fantasy because you're not going to be able to you're not ever going to be able to start him because we don't expect his role to be consistent.
No, and he's going to have some very frustrating, like 13-point weeks where he has 2 touchdowns, and you look at the waiver wire and he might be there, and you think to yourself, "Do I really want to do this?" And no, you don't really want to do this. Believe me.
He is what I call a fantasy anchor. He is a guy that you can't drop because he'll have good games every couple of games, but he never does anything for you because you just, unless you just get lucky, you're never going to know when to start him.
Yeah.
DeAndre Hopkins, same team, a little bit of better line here with D-Hop, 1,350 receiving yards. I think that was probably 350 and a half. 350 and a half. I actually 0.6 Dalton has on the rundown, so that would be something. 1,350 and a half receiving yards. I'll go first here. I'm taking the over. He barely broke 1,400 last year. We get 17 games this year. This is a guy who actually has been very durable throughout his career. He pretty much always plays at least 14 or 15 games, and if you look through his year by year, he has played all 16 games multiple times. And Kyler just has a lot of room to grow as a passer, even from what he was last year. So I just think there's even more upside in the passing game and for Hopkins. And Hopkins, Kyler got banged up. I think Hopkins, I remember him playing through some stuff last year down the stretch as well. And he's a guy that will play through injury. He's done it before. I just think they add a couple guys in AJ Green, Rondell Moore, nobody who does anything to discourage the Cardinals from funneling their entire passing game through Hopkins. I think he'll be top 5 in the league again in targets, and with maybe a better Kyler Murray, I'd say that is an over for me.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat as you. In 16 games, he had a higher number, and in 8 of those games, we had a very beleaguered Kyler Murray. If you're looking, since you and I are in pretty much solid agreement in this, if you're looking for reasons not to, that route tree that Cliff Kingsbury has him running is just incredibly scary. He's on one side of the field all the time. He's only lining up one way, and maybe somebody in the NFL figures out how to, prevent that. It is DeAndre Hopkins, though. He's like a top 5 talent at the position. It's really hard for anybody to cover him. And I know they added to their wide receiver room, but I still don't see anybody else in this wide receiver room who excites me. AJ Green, he's washed.
Yeah, it's like Christian Kirk is what he is at this point. Like the hope that people had for him, I think, has probably faded quite a bit after not doing much last year.
Yeah, and same with Andy Isabella. He's in the same boat. And Rondell Moore is a complete wild card. He hasn't played football in almost 3 years at this point. He's a freak athlete, but it's also really tiny for the position, and we just don't know how they're going to utilize him. Hopkins is just going to be the target hog here, and I can't even tell you who plays. Dan Arnold is the tight end, I think. I think he might be somewhere else, actually.
Tight end is not too involved in the Cliff Kingsbury spread offense.
Fake sharp Cliff Kingsbury.
Johnny?
See, now you got me on that injury sports predictor website, and I was very curious. I was like, let's see what DeAndre Hopkins is, because like you said, he's played 16 games, a lot. Mm-hmm. And according to the sports injury predictor, he has a 62% chance of being injured. Projected games missed for 2021 is 2 games, which I think I can't stop messing around with this website now.
It's pretty insane that he's only projected to play 1 more game than James Conner, who has played like 8, 9, like his best season's like 14 games. And he's a running back, and those positions just get hurt a lot more anyway.
Yeah, it's wild because then it shows you like every single injury he's had in his entire career. Yep. But I'm still gonna take the over with this. Like Hopkins is he's just unreal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's pretty undeniable. Will Fuller, Dalton. I thought we were gonna have major disagreement when I saw that you added this as the 5th and final guy, but I got an inclination that maybe you're going with the under here. I think you know where I stand.
Yeah, it's Will Fuller at 925 and a half yards. And I do take the under here. Let me just first and foremost say he's missing a game already. That already hurts a little bit. and he is likely going to miss a few other games if we just know who he is.
Yes, he's never played more than 14 games, hasn't played more than 11 since his rookie season.
Well, he was going to do it if it wasn't for the PEDs.
Well, yeah, but that unfortunately, your brain and decision making is part of you as a fantasy football player. So,
but this, first of all, let me just say I still love him in fantasy because he's so cheap. And I really think Will Fuller is one of those guys who has the upside of like 1,200 yards in a season pretty easily.
Really, 1,200 yards?
Yes, I mean
he's never broke 900.
I think he was on pace last season.
Well, yeah, but then he didn't play the last couple games because he's Will Fuller.
But he was absolutely on pace. But I think that this is a bigger concern of mine with Tua.
Vegas doesn't cash your bet if the guy's on pace for it.
Well, they should because he was definitely there, and I think that those PEDs were just total BS.
I love how you're taking the under, but you just can't say anything bad about your precious Will Fuller.
Quit. Well, and this is, the thing is, even if Will Fuller played a full 16 game, not 17 because the suspension season, I'm still scared about this because you're also betting on Tua to be good. I mean, the type of player Will Fuller is, he's probably not going to be getting like short screen routes most of the time. They're probably going to be running him down the field. And if Tua and the downfield issues we saw last season, I know a lot of them are attributed as wide receivers, end up being more related to Tua, then you're placing your bet on a guy who's still pretty unproven in the NFL. And that scares me too. So there's just not a lot of reason for me to take this.
I will say just on Tua that there is definitely some unknown and some concern there, especially with the down the field stuff. But I think the thing to remember about Tua is he was he was a chucker in college. His yards per completion were like ridiculous in college. So hopefully he can get back to that. And they've definitely built their team to try and get him back to that with his former receiver and Jalen Waddle, and obviously Will Fuller as well. I'm going under. I'm obviously in agreement with you here. Again, thought we were going to be in for pretty heated disagreement. He has never broke 900 yards before. Like I said, I know he would have last year, but he's Will Fuller. He just happened to miss a couple games, and you're already behind the 8 ball, like you said, with missing the game in week 1. There will probably be more. Johnny, I'm sure you're looking up his injury predictor right now. I'll be anxiously awaiting that report when it gets to your turn.
So it's like 100%.
Like I said, he hasn't played more than 11 games since his rookie season. He would need to average. Let's just say he had like his typical injury season and he plays 11 games, 12 games even. We'll say 11. He'd have to average like 85 yards a game to hit that number. And even if he has a good fantasy season, I just have a tough time seeing him, especially if he misses time, getting to that number because there's just so many. We've talked about this. They're kind of a fantasy quagmire on that team. You've got Jalen Waddle, you've got Devontae Parker, you've got Preston Williams, you've got the running backs, and that's not even mentioning I can't think of the tight end's name, Gesicki. That's not even mentioning Gesicki, who is probably one of the top 3 for sure pass catchers on that team, and maybe the second guy, depending on how the receivers shake out. I also just think that Waddle is like better than Will Fuller. I'm sure you're not going to be surprised. Don't totally buy the great season that Will Fuller had last year. I don't buy him as like a consistent, consistently great player all throughout the route tree. He's very good at running the deep ball. He's got great speed, can stretch the defense. Obviously, Waddle can do that as well, but just not a huge believer that Fuller can do what he did again last season. He also had a great quarterback, and he had some garbage time touchdowns that we don't have to revisit, but he definitely was a garbage time hero in a couple of his big games. But I'm going pretty firmly with the under. Johnny, when's Will Fuller getting hurt this year?
Well, the first thing that shows is high risk, bright red letters. Chance of injury is 90%.
Wow.
Just in 2021, chance of injury per game is 13%.
That's insane. Just in each individual game,
every single game,
13% chance of getting hurt.
And then projected games missed for 2021 is 3.4.
So even more than James Conner. So they're even pretty conservative with their projections. It sounds like.
Can we just get you on record saying you think Waddle's better than Fuller?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I don't know what you want to do with that, but yeah, absolutely.
I
think
just
he's
want to
better
make
than
sure we're
Fuller.
aware of. Okay, I'll take that.
What are we gonna do in 5 years? Look back and see who's had the better
No,
career.
I just think it's absurd. I mean, Jalen Waddle. I feel like
So? Remember, Jalen Waddle was Alabama's leading receiver until he got hurt last year. Better than Devontae Smith, who had a better season than Jamar Chase and those are like all-time college football receivers.
yeah, absolutely. And we've had guys have amazing college careers and then come in and be absolute duds in the NFL.
Yeah, but also I've talked about about Waddle, where I like he could definitely be like not Tyreek Hill, but like when people bring up Tyreek Hill comparisons, it's usually pretty ridiculous. Not in this case. He might not have like the high point and some of the other freak athleticism that Tyreek has, but he is very fast, very quick acceleration. He is just an absolute game breaker.
I'll save it for another time because I know we're trying to slip through this quickly, but I have to find it for you. But there's like a spot on stat for stat comparison of John Ross and Jalen Waddle. And
well, yeah, that's because Waddle missed like how many? He only played 4 games last year, and the years before that, he was playing with Jerry Jeudy, Henry Ruggs, Devon. Like he's playing with pros up and down the roster.
Absolutely, but I mean to say he's better than an established wide receiver in the NFL who's done a good job in the NFL.
He's never broke 1,000 yards. How is
because of
established
injury, not because
okay, but he's never broke 1,000 yards.
I think if you ask anybody if Will Fuller is a good receiver, they're going to say yes. A good NFL receiver.
I'd say he's a fine NFL receiver.
I think we're playing word games with those two.
I would say fine to pretty good, but I mean, look, I'm not saying that for sure. Although I think I did actually say I'd take Waddle this year just because he has. I like the upside. Okay, in 2 years, I think we're gonna already look back and say that Waddle is better than Fuller ever was in the NFL, easily.
Johnny, do you want to set a calendar reminder?
Already drafted up.
It might already be sooner than that.
So July of 2023.
Sure, why not? We'll be on episode whatever. Like we might be close to 100 episodes at that point.
Hopefully
maybe our 100th episode can be
the day that Will Fuller is better than Jalen Waddle.
Okay, we'll see. Okay, enough Will Fuller. Guys that we are scared that we're wrong about that could burn us, Dalton. I'll go first because I have Mr. Joe Burrow. He was the guy that was on your list that you removed. So we can both give the little Burrow spiel here. I have him as QB 11 ahead of guys like Matt Stafford, Baker Mayfield, even Jalen Hurts. With as bad of a passer as he was, he does have the rushing floor, which it's a pretty aggressive rank. I'll just be honest. It feels like I'm really betting on not the best case, but like I'm betting on like 90% best case for Joe Burrow, I think, this year with that rank. Obviously, everybody knows he completely shattered his knee last season. So he's got just that X factor. He's coming back from a catastrophic injury. And it wasn't like week 1. It was like halfway through the season. I mean, reports have been fine so far, but we'll see how long before he actually looks like the Joe Burrow of old. He showed a little bit of his mobility last year. He came in the league as a pretty mobile guy. I do have some concern that might take a while to come back with that injury this year. And then also I just have concerns with the offensive line. I know they added some guys, but we've talked about it. I think we both would have preferred they go with Sewell at number whatever it was, 4 or 5 overall instead of Jamar Chase, even with as good as Chase is. I saw Joe Burrow like almost get killed on a weekly basis before he got hurt. Don't want to see that again. And part of that I know was Burrow held the ball too long, tried to play, I guess, hero ball. We'll use an NBA term. Hero ball, for lack of a better term, tried to make amazing plays instead of preserving himself a little bit. But even with that, I've got concerns with the O-line. I've got concerns with the health of Burrow coming back. I love T. Higgins, and he's a good receiver. I think Jamar Chase is going to be very good and should lead to some more efficient deep ball stuff. But also Chase is only a rookie, so there's no guarantees this year. Dalton, I've got more, or maybe I can give a little bit of a positive spin on Burrow before I close out, but I will let you give your Burrow take in the meantime.
Well, it's really hard to justify where we both have him, which is inside the top 12 QBs.
I mean, you're starting him week 1 if you take him there, which just feels very scary. It's a different deal to rank a guy there, and then to come to the realization like, oh my god, like he's my starting quarterback right away.
Yeah, well, and some of the things that scare me. I mean, last year, part of what he did was on the back of volume, and I'm not too worried about that because Zach Taylor let Andy Dalton throw 50 times, and Joe Burrow is better than Andy Dalton. That's a take I'm okay with. But I mean, his touchdown percentage was 3.2, league average is 5.1, and in fantasy, how Burrow was making up for that was he was rushing, and he was rushing in the red zone too to get closer and to get some of his rushing touchdowns. I really think that goes away. And the other thing is in 10 games, Burrow took 32 sacks. And I know there's
like so many.
I know. And I know Riley Reef and a couple other guys are getting shuffled in, and Jonah Williams is supposed to be back, and the offensive line is supposed to be better. But part of sacks is it's a QB stat too, because a QB holds the ball too long and tries to make plays. And with Joe Burrow coming off of that injury, I'm worried about him just not trying to make plays and just not being able to move in the pocket, just taking more sacks and being incredibly inefficient. He has the weapons, and they're going to have to throw a lot because their defense stinks. But are there games that he's going to have a sub 50% completion rate and still throw for 300 yards and you're going to want to puke watching? I just don't know where he stands without some of that mobility. And I don't know. I mean, a full leg tear like he had, I just don't know how you come back from that, especially so quickly.
So the positive spin now on Burrow, you mentioned the volume, and that was something I wanted to touch on. And this isn't like a Dak Prescott, like 4 games. This is 10 games. This is over half the season where he had this type of volume. The Bengals were 3rd in the league in plays per game in the 10 games that he started, just about 71 a game. He averaged 40 pass attempts, but 40 and a half basically a game. Take that over a full 16-game season. That's almost 650 attempts. That's top 20 all time. And again, that's a 10-game sample. He was on pace to attempt a lot of passes last year. Part of that is because you mentioned it. He was inefficient. The touchdowns were bad. The deep ball, he was 20% on deep ball completion percentage. That's QB 36. Quick math tells me that's behind a couple guys who aren't starting quarterbacks in the NFL. So you'd expect that to get better with hopefully a little bit of an improved offensive line and obviously better weapons and a better T. Higgins in year 2. We'll see about Chase, but he should be better than what AJ Green was last year. And then you've obviously got Tyler Boyd in the slot. So you're betting on more efficiency on the deep stuff. You're betting on volume, and you're just betting on him being better than he was last year, quite frankly, because even before he got hurt, like he was good, but I felt like people were overhyping him because he was the number 1 pick and like we just wanted him to be good so bad. He was fine, but like I think Herbert was way better in the games they both played last year.
Yeah, and I'd actually probably agree with that. And Herbert was behind a bad offensive line too and didn't have anywhere. I'd have to quickly look it up, but I don't think Justin Herbert took – do you think he took 32 sacks last year?
I highly doubt it. I can look it up if you want to get to your next guy on your list, or your first guy, since I guess you don't have Burrow.
Yeah, so my first guy, I also went quarterback here, but my worry is that I'm too low on him. And it's Jalen Hurts, who I have a QB 16. And consensus, he's dropped from QB 8 to QB 10, but he's still being pegged as a QB top 12. You start him week 1 guy, and 77th overall in average draft. My first, what kind of scares me is Nick Sirianni coached the 9th best offense last season with Phillip Rivers, so he can do a lot with little. I mean, there's not a lot of wide receiving talent there, and the running back room was obviously better. But Kenneth Gainwell, Naheem Hines are pretty similar. There is no Jonathan Taylor, but Jalen Hurts also has massive rushing upside. The offensive line, if they keep their 3 key guys healthy that got injured last year, it's probably easily a top 10 offensive line in the NFL.
It's at least for sure better than last year when it was like one of the worst in the league.
Yeah, and I mean, it can't get much worse than it. Carson Wentz was 5th in turnover percentage last year, and that's because he held on the ball a lot. If Sirianni can coach up some of the Phillip Rivers quick releases, I mean, you think Jalen Hurts has to be a little more efficient. He has Devonta Smith. He's going to have a second-year Jalen Reagor. Dallas Goedert, they don't have the best wide receiver room, but neither did the Colts, and Nick Sirianni did a lot with that. And, I mean, if his rushing, that I've seen people predict him to have up to 1,300 rushing yards. I mean, that's an absurd number.
That's absurd. That's just not happening. I can tell you right now.
If reputable people think he has like 1,000-yard rushing upside, it almost automatically puts him in a top 12 quarterback spot. And I just worry that I'm too low. On the other side, I mean, full reconstruction mode, and he's from an old regime and a new coaching staff. And I don't know how short the leash is in Philadelphia for Jalen Hurts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm honestly not that concerned. It's funny because I took the over on his total, so I think that basically means I think he's going to start the whole season. But I really think the passing can improve at least a little bit from last season for the factors you mentioned. You've got new coordinators, new coaches in there, and you've got Devontae Smith, who I think is going to be a stud right away, quite frankly, and hopefully a healthy Dallas Goedert. I mean, they were just on top of not being a good wide receiver core. They were just banged up all last season. Rager hurt right off the bat. So maybe a better bill of health for that team as a whole will help him improve as a passer a little bit. I just don't he's a good running quarterback, but he's not like Lamar Jackson. He's not Kyler Murray. I don't even know. Maybe he's comparable to Josh Allen, but not nearly as big. He doesn't have the power that Allen has, but he has similar athleticism. So I don't think he's even going to get 1,000 rushing yards this year if I had to guess, which is a lot for a quarterback, but that's way below 1,300.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to go back to previous, Justin Herbert and Joe Burrow had the same number of sacks in 5 games.
I had it here too. Yep, 32 sacks.
Yeah, but my concern is if he comes out and he fixes his passing, and I mean, if he's a 280 plus, 200 yards or more a game passing, and, he can tack on 30, 40 rushing yards and a couple of touchdowns here, I mean, that's pretty much fantasy relevant week to week with some pretty high upside. And that's my concern is that if you're not taking him as a QB1, you're probably not getting him in drafts because he's probably the sixth. But his range of outcomes probably extends to Daniel Jones to me. I mean, to what we saw Daniel Jones do last year.
I was going to say the thing that puts him where he's at in my ranks is even though I think the passing can improve, I think there's a very good chance it's very inconsistent. He could easily have games where he has, 110 passing yards. He might have 50 rushing yards to save his day a little bit, but if there's only one total touchdown sprinkled in there, especially if it's a passing touchdown, not a good day for a quarterback. And I can see that happening multiple times, and that's not obviously even including any turnovers he could have. But on to my second guy here, a little bit more of a high-profile guy in Najee Harris. So this is a guy who I have pretty much said I think you're going to have to grit your teeth and go with volume and inefficiency if you're taking him this season and through really no fault of his own. But here's the thing, that offensive line was very bad last year. They're completely overhauling it. And I think a lot of people are looking at that as oh my God, they're losing all of their offensive linemen. It's going to be so bad this year. It's it really can't be much worse than it was last season. And getting all of the bad old washed guys out of there actually might make it better. Maybe not by much, but I think you can make the argument that it could be better than the offensive line that had clearly aged out of playing its best football last season. And the Steelers, I mean, I know Le'Veon Bell was awesome, so it's a little bit of a different conversation, but you have James Conner. They seem to really like the workhorse type of back there. And this is a guy who, I wouldn't say that and project him for that if he didn't have that skill set. And he just flat does. Obviously, he's a mountain of a man. He can handle about as many he can handle 20 rushes a game probably and be just fine. But the thing that kind of sets him apart and makes me nervous for my ranking, which I believe is RB 15 or 16, is his receiving upside. So 43 receptions for 425 last year, 27 the year before that. But this is with an Alabama team that obviously is great, number one, but number two is just stacked with pros at receiver every year. And he's still able to carve out 43 receptions, which in college, and especially at Alabama, that's very, very impressive. I went and looked back at every season in the last decade at Alabama. The closest guy was 32 receptions for Mark Ingram in one of his seasons. Nobody else is even close to his receiving production since he's been there. So he's he's got that upside. And he's also second in offensive rookie of the year at 6-1, right behind Lawrence. So I think people are expecting him to have a big year, and rightfully so. It's going to come down to that offensive line and whether or not he can kind of overcome a little bit of those deficiencies with the stuff in the passing game. And that's going to come down a little bit to Big Ben. And I definitely have some concern that I am sleeping on the upside a little bit.
Well, and this is a guy we both share concern with. I have him at RB16 behind guys like Mixon and Carson and CEH. And that's definitely his ADP right now in half-point PPR is 13th among running backs. But, I mean, one of my bigger concerns is that I really feel like we are under-projecting how bad this Pittsburgh offense potentially could be.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Big Ben fell off the face of the earth last year in the season.
Big Ben cares about his diet now. Big news.
Yeah, surprise, an athlete 40 years into his career finally figured out diet might be a factor. But, I mean, and part of why Big Ben's been great is he, stands in the pocket and takes some absurd hits, and he just can't anymore. The play-action game in Pittsburgh last year was so subpar. And and you talked about it, the plus side here is that Mike Tomlin does not like taking his running back off the field. I think he's a coach who believes that if the running back can be on the field all the time, then defenses have a harder time scheming for them. So he's going to want to make Najee Harris catch balls. If Najee Harris can already catch them, that's going to be good. And then behind him is Kalen Ballage, Anthony McFarland, and Benny Snell, who I think is going to get cut from what I'm hearing.
Yeah, it's not exactly an inspiring group. I will Anthony McFarland, I think he's got his old offensive coordinator from Maryland with him. That's about all the narrative I can drum up for any of those backup running backs there.
Yeah, and Kalen Ballage had a really good Instagram story where he was working out. So if you want to try to talk someone else up there, it's hard. But no, I mean this is the only guy who's going to give every down. He's probably my lowest ranked player who gets workhorse duties in my rankings.
Yeah,
and it's just so hard for me to justify moving him up, especially as a rookie. Or just sometimes rookies just don't work out in the NFL, and we just don't know. I mean, I know Najee was really good at Alabama, but who knows what it looks like?
Yep, and I've mentioned exactly that, where it's like we forget that, again, these are rookies. They have short leashes sometimes in the NFL with these rookies. All it could take is a mistaken pass pro that gets I'll call him medium Ben from now on. That gets medium Ben blown up and injured, and he could be on the bench for a whole quarter or 2 quarters or whatever. So there is definitely that downside, and the volume is not as sure as people make it out to be, I don't think. But still, like you said, exactly like you said, every other guy who has that real workhorse potential, I have higher than him, and this is a guy that we've never seen in the NFL. So there's just also the mystery of the unknown. So I'm concerned.
Yeah, and speaking of being concerned,
that's what we're speaking on here. Go ahead, your last guy.
The guy that because he's a top four round pick, and I'm pretty far off on consensus. DeAndre Swift is the RB18 right now, and he's the RB23 in my rankings, which means I'll never get him in any drafts. And I am slightly to moderately concerned because there is an exponential talent level here as far as a receiving back and just a running back in general. And my concerns are basically off the field. I mean, there's hardly any statistics that would back up my claims. It's that I think Dan Campbell is just not a good coach. And I think Anthony Lynn is an even worse coach. And Jamal Williams is a really good back too. Guy loves anime. He's on my TikTok all the time, by the way, watching anime as a side note.
What's his most common anime?
But he's really into Demon Slayer lately, apparently.
Okay.
But Jamal Williams did get, a 40% snap share with Aaron Jones. So he's very talented, and DeAndre Swift does have that same Aaron Jones-esque profile. But you combine Jared Goff and this bad offense, and DeAndre Swift might be the best player on it. TJ Hawkinson and DeAndre Swift are probably the best pass catchers. And I know I've talked really poorly of Anthony Lynn and Dan Campbell, but at some point, if you want to win an NFL game, you have to use your weapons. And if DeAndre Swift just gets used even close to right, I mean, he can have really, really good weeks. He probably doesn't have top top 8 running back upside just because of how bad this offense will be, but he could be a weekly top 12 option if they're passing it to him and they're rushing him effectively. And that's my concern, is that I'm going to completely whiff on him because I'm just so averse to this coaching staff. Probably my most hated coaching staff in the NFL right now.
So we'll call it the Anthony Lynn honorary award every year. I talked about him a lot last week, so if anyone wants to listen to my full DeAndre Swift take, it is definitely on last week's show. I understand the concern both ways, no doubt. I had him up in that 14-15 range. Now I have him closer to 18, and again, that was not about him, pretty much all about his situation, all about the possible downside with that team, with that offense, the fact that they could score maybe 20 total touchdowns this year and it wouldn't like move the needle as a shocking thing that happened. As a player, you're definitely right that he has all of the tools to be a great NFL running back. And I personally, even with his situation, 23 is still a little bit low for me, but 18 to 23, it's kind of the same tier of guys in that group. So not too crazy, but yeah, I can definitely understand the hesitation with Swift because he is probably one of the 10 or 15 most talented guys in the NFL for sure, as far as running backs.
And I know you haven't seen him yet, but if you look at my ranks, and this is the real, the 3 guys before him are David Montgomery, Miles Sanders, and Josh Jacobs. And that I have a very big concern about ranking David Montgomery above a lot of guys.
Yeah, I have Jacobs above Swift, but the other 2 guys I think I have Swift above in my rankings. It's funny, last week when Swift was my mover, he moved down. I swear I saw at least 1, if not 2, articles from reputable sources, like reputable fantasy sources, that was like, could DeAndre Swift replicate Alvin Kamara's? It's like what? where are we getting this from? So it's like as I'm going the opposite way, and as you're steadily low on him, it's like there are people who think he could be like legit like top 6 running back apparently this year. Which again, he has that skill, but just not the situation right now. I don't think.
He'll replicate Alvin Kamara's 6-game touchdown over the span of 13 games.
Yeah, honestly, it might take that long. Even though he was a high touchdown guy last year, it could definitely take that long.
Yeah. But if he somehow gets, 70% of the snaps and a good rushing total, and Jared Goff learns to target running backs, suddenly he's very, very good back to own.
Yeah, I just don't think it's easy to make this comparison because it's Jamal Williams and you're seeing it's the same players with the Aaron Jones backfield. But I see Aaron Jones and Swift as similar guys, and that you don't really ever want them if you're the coach to have that high of volume and snap share because you want them to last the whole season. Both are smaller guys and both just I don't think are really built for that workload. But Dalton, anything else on DeAndre Swift before we close it out here?
That's it. We were swift with this podcast.
Yeah, under 55 minutes. That's probably the shortest of the renewed season for sure. And that is going to do it for episode 37 of the Half Point Per Podcast. We will not have a show next week. I'm going to be out of town. Going to actually see Johnny on Sunday, I think. So that'll be a good time. No podcast next week. We'll have
Vlog it.
We'll have 2 the week after. I'm not vlogging it. Anybody who wants to vlog though, go watch Matisse Bible. Definitely going to give him the plug. Our 10 to 15 weekly listeners can go enjoy his amazingly edited vlogs. But no podcast next week. We'll have 2 for you the week after that. They'll both be around this length. They're a little shorter. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok at Half Point Per Pod. Subscribe to the YouTube. Watch on the YouTube. Just search Half Point Per Podcast. Again, the link to all of those things is in the show notes, and we will talk to you guys in 2 weeks.